If it's not a tomb, what would you conjecture is the purpose?
I personally, and it's speculation, I think they were functional. I think they did something. I think they're all broken now. They don't work anymore. I think they were a functional device. What that is, I don't know. There's lots of theories out there. A guy named Chris Dunn, a good friend of mine, a very good author, engineer. He really has moved this whole field forward in a lot of ways when it comes to ancient precision and technology.
Yeah.
He has a theory that it's like the Giza power plant. It does explain, his theory does explain all of the elements of the pyramid. He used it to correctly predict what was behind Gatenbrink's door, which is one of those little things in one of the shafts in the Great Pyramid.
Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, so there's really weird aspects to the Great Pyramid.
These are not functional, by the way.
These are your bracelets?
Yeah.
You like clang them together?
Yeah. Oh,
Dynastic Egyptians, not that functional.
Exactly. Dynastic Egyptians did not get it, dude.
Yeah.
The ancient Civ ones
Looks great, though.
Yeah, they understand visuals for sure.
Yeah.
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, so Gatenbrink's door, well, there's these strange features in there, right? You've got...
So we're inside the Great Pyramid.
So you go in, there's 3 chambers, right?
Yeah.
There's a subterranean chamber that's down way below it in the bedrock with a shaft that goes through the pyramid.
Can we access that? Because I don't think I went inside. I don't know if I went down.
So not unless you do like a special permission. Every time we rent it out for 2 hours, they open it up for us.
Oh, wow.
We go in there. So if you go in on a tourist ticket, you can go into like the Grand Gallery and up into the King's Chamber.
Yeah,
that's where most people go.
Yeah.
There's also a chamber below that called the Queen's Chamber. Now, both the so-called King and Queen's Chamber have these shafts, right? So there's the ones in the King's Chamber go to the outside. We know this because at some point, you know, some of these crazy British guys were rolling cannonballs down them and they ended up in the King's Chamber like, that connects.
Oh, wow.
So
They just found cannonballs in the tomb and they were like...
Well, they were just like, there's an opening. We think it might be one of these shafts. Let's find out. And then,
hilarious.
They're probably damaged. I mean, there's rods, there's explorations of these shafts. There's like big, long steel rods that they've tried to probe them with. But the ones in the Queen's Chamber are more interesting because they don't go to the outside. They terminate somewhere inside the structure. Now, this is like a 4 to 6 inch square shaft, right?
Wait.
It's
4 to 6 inch.
It's this big. It's how the hell do you make it has to be made when you're building the structure. Like it has to be planned. We don't know where they go, but we sent robots down them and it turns out they go to what looks like a little door. There's a little door at the end. It's a limestone plug and it looks like it's got, if you go to like Gatenbrink's door, maybe there's pictures of it there, I don't know, but
maybe this?
Gatenbrink, yeah, that's it there. Well, that's after they drilled through it. So they're actually... And on the door are these two, what they say are copper handles, but one of them's eroded more than the other. It's almost like it's an anode and cathode, like it may have been part of some sort of function.
Like a fucking battery?
Yeah, something like that. So part of Chris Dunn's theory, that's it there. So this is what's at the end of this shaft.
Get the fuck out of here.
And then eventually...
Like a socket.
Yeah, it's like a socket. Well, those little copper things that are on there. But
No, the hole they
drilled it.
Okay.
You see the drill bit there.
Yeah.
So Chris Dunn, anyway, so he explains all of these features of the pyramid in his Giza power plant theory. And using his theory, before they drilled through the hole, he said, what they're going to find is another void and another little door. And they drilled through the hole, they drilled through this wall, and guess what they found?
Another
void and another little
fucking door.
Yep.
Holy shit.
So I think he was onto something.
And again, it lines up with your theory. It's too advanced for it not to be functional.
Yeah, there's no people. They like, this is where the soul would have escaped and gone up towards like this is nonsense.
And then to your
this is
point
such
about
an achievement.
building a pyramid, just that shape is the most functional to build. This is a functional thing. That's why we're going to build it in a pyramid shape.
100%.
Yeah.
That is fucked.
And they haven't drilled
This
past
battery theory?
They didn't drill past the second door.
No, as far as there's a lot of nonsense going on about this for a long time. Like Gatenbrink sent his robot up the wrong shaft as well. We went and had a look in there, and Zahiwas threw him out of Egypt, and so there's been a lot of intrigue. There's a dark there's all sorts of stories when you dive into Egyptology, in particular in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years, of what's gone on in these pyramids and on these sites and about who's done what where. It's a lot of stories that all revolve around certain particular characters that have been in charge of some antiquities departments in Egypt.
Can you speak to the politics of why you can't start just excavating more of these shafts?
It's controlled by the Council of Antiquities. It used to be called the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt.
Very
and
proper.
for a long time, a guy named Zahiwas was in charge of that. And this is, this comes back to the labyrinth story as well that we mentioned before, or we talked about before. And, you know, they really tightly control what goes on the sites, right? So you can't just roll up there and say, hey, I want to dig. The way that works is you have to partner with the council to do anything. And part of that is also they will want to know what your purpose is, what are you trying to find, and then they get to control the release of information at the end of it. So typically what happens is you have institutions like universities from France or Belgium, Austria, America, wherever, Britain, they have access to a particular site to do research in a certain way, and then that information is very slowly released whenever the Egyptian authorities deem it necessary to do so.
Why are they so protective of this theory of history? Because science.
Why are they?
Why are the people who are
That's their claim to fame, my boy. That's all they got.
I guess, but to me, science is constantly disproving other science.
They don't give a fuck about science. They give a fuck about like, yo, we're Egyptian. These pyramids are fire. Everybody loves these pyramids. We made them. And if this dickhead comes over there and goes, nah, it was some other people 30,000 years ago. You just bumped in on it. They're like, man, shut the fuck up. I'm not going to let you discredit our whole shit.
I guess in my mind, they're still Egyptian. And it would still be like, yo, we survived motherfucking apocalypse. We came back. Yeah. We're still here.
There's a good argument to that. But I think they might look at it like, man, we didn't really do shit since back in the day.
It's not even necessarily Egyptian that's driving this too. It's kind of mainstream Egyptology and
also, yeah, they don't want to take
archaeology.
the L. And also, I'm sure there's a religious component, which is like, you know, if you're dating the world, you know, 6,000 years ago, and then you come in and it's 50,000 years,
and
100,000 years.
Yeah, million.
Yeah. Oh, it operates a bit like a religion, to be honest. And unfortunately, there's a lot of domains of science that suffer from that type of embedded, you know, dogma to one extent. And it does tie back to these. Essentially, what's history, right? It's a story that you cobble together from a collection of incomplete facts. Now, when more new facts come up, and Younger Dryas and all this new scientific work, we should be taking that into account, but you know, the problem arises when it starts to pull the rug out of the people that have really set what that story is. And honestly, the story of history and civilization hasn't changed for around 100 years. It still hasn't changed, even with Göbekli Tepe. We still say, well, civilization started 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians, then the Egyptians, and then the Greeks and Romans, Chinese, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a framework here for how this could be conducting energy and power and what that power would be used for? Chris
Dunn's Giza power plant theory takes into account all of this stuff. I'm not an expert on it, but it has a lot to do with acoustics. The Grand Gallery has a bunch of these Helmholtz resonators in it. It's a really interesting theory. There's like different fluids and chemicals used in these shafts. There's a lot to it. And there's a lot of evidence for it as well. Like those shafts in the Queen's Chamber, for example, I mean, they don't even come out into the Queen's Chamber. They terminate like 6 inches from the wall. So there was a guy running around like literally tapping on the wall. He's like, oh, that sounds a bit different behind there. So what do they get? A sledgehammer and they bust the wall open. They find the shafts. Like there's nothing. And when they first found the Queen's Chamber, by the way, it was covered in like 6 inches of these crystals that may have been the byproduct of some sort of chemical reaction. And in fact, I've got in here, I shouldn't have gone in there, but they've been doing these experiments. So they unlocked one of these gates. There's like a shaft and a little grotto area that goes in through, because there's this alcove in the Queen's Chamber, but you can go right into the masonry behind it and it opens up into a little grotto area. I crawled in there and I filmed, and you can still find chunks of this crystal and all these weird growths that are, because they cleaned it all up and carved it all off when they cleaned up the inside of the pyramid. But there's a lot of this weird evidence, like something else was going on.
And what is his theory as to what this power could have been used for?
Some form of energy. I don't know, some sort of microwave energy that they could have used if they had a receiver for it. They could have done it. Essentially, they think it may be coming from like this harmonic tone or this generation. It comes from the earth. It's a lot of complex theories on it. I don't know. Like I think his theory is the best one that we have that explains it with our tech. My personal opinion is I think it's probably broader than that. I think we don't quite understand what it's for, but I do think it was functional.
Can you explain this resonance theory that you shared? I think it was on the Concrete podcast that you did.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, there's one thing you find when you go in, and you would have found this when you went into the King's Chamber, like it's insanely resonant, right? It's just like this, the acoustics in there are off the charts.
Yeah.
And there is, you know, it could be coincidence.
It's also very underwhelming, which makes me feel like it wasn't a chamber.
The chamber?
The chamber itself, you're in there, you're like, oh, this is just like the awe-inspiring view of the pyramids on the outside. And then you get into this king's chamber, right?
Yeah, it's a box.
It's a box.
Yeah,
so
but it is made up of like 70-ton granite monoliths.
there's no question. Like the feat in order to execute placing these 70-ton granite blocks around it is very special. But when you look at the grandiosity of like the dynastic Egyptians, it's not reflected in this room in any way. And if that was the king's room, like for a king, then I think it'd be a little different. It makes way more sense to me that this is a power factory because that looks like the source of the power or the battery's hooked up or whatever it is. That to me makes way more sense. Because if I'm the king and that's the room you made me, you're dead.
Do we know if granite?
You know what I mean? I'm not dying here, motherfucker. I need more shit.
Yeah.
And it is just barren. It's empty.
Bury you here.
Tomb right there.
Do we know if granite has any functional properties that could be?
Yeah, it's piezoelectric. It's a conductor. It's piezoelectric. If you hit it with enough pressure, it generates electricity. There's a lot of quartz content in the granite. I've done experiments with guys. We've actually seen different electrical conductivity properties between granite, basalt, and limestone. They have different properties. So you see these types of stones lined up and sites made of these different types of stones that have these different electromagnetic properties to them. I think there's possibilities. I think that's where we should be experimenting and doing work to try and figure it out.
Does it make, is there evidence of cities close to every one of these pyramids? Because that makes sense that if it's the power plant for the city, right? But if they're just out there in the middle of nowhere and there's no city around it, then it doesn't, the power plant theory kind of like goes away.
We don't know. The city's probably built on top of the remnants of older cities. I mean, you see this in Cusco and other places too.
Yeah.
I mean, so each of those pyramids, that's the interesting thing about those pyramid sites is that they are all, I call them like the Sun Belt. From each one, you can see the next one. So starting up at Abu Rawash, up on the hill, you can see Giza, then you can look down to see, you know, Abu Sir, to Saqqara, to Dashur, and you see each other on the horizon. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe they're all connected. There's been rumors of underground infrastructure in between these sites. I've heard that story.
Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Connecting all the...
Potentially. I've heard that story. I don't know.
Which would make sense functionally if you need to power the whole city or whatever.
Yeah. So now, something so monumental as the pyramids of Giza and the fact that perhaps maybe other people built them and then they were discovered by new people and then those people died out and discovered by new people. Why was it eventually just left so barren for so long?
Well, it was used as a quarry. Eventually, it's like, you know what? You know what's easier than digging up stone from the ground? Taking the stone from this damn thing.
And quarry, just for anybody listening, it's just a sourcing place for stone.
Yeah, there were sources of quarries. People would just take stone from it. Like people lived up until about probably less than 100 years ago. People lived at these sites in Egypt, the temples, the pyramid places. Before they became these tourist attractions, people would like pitch their tents and they'd cut holes in the stone to tie the camels up. Donkeys or whatever, and they'd live there. Like, same as all the temples. People just live there, turn into markets. I mean, we blackened the ceilings of these temples from cook fires for generations. And then eventually the government came along and says, you know what, you guys get all the F out. We're going to turn these into tourist attractions. So in some ways, like we've inherited them, these sites today. We use them as tourist attractions. We've renovated them as tourist attractions.
You would think that the neighborhood...
Maybe the Egyptians did the same thing.
...around the pyramids would be like Central Park... property. You know what I mean? Like, it is not. Like, there are people out there who probably live in like really like lower income homes that have a perfect view of the most amazing thing that humans have ever created.
My buddy Yusuf, he lives in Nazlet El Samam, which is the village near the Sphinx entrance, and he's got his shop there, and his little balcony's on the 5th floor of this building, and we sit out there and play music or whatever and just stare right at the Sphinx and the pyramids. Like, that's the view he grew up with. It's insane.
Wow.
Yeah, it is cool. And they're trying to knock it all down now. The government wants to go in there and
build hotels.
They want to
do
build
all this
hotels.
Stuff,
Yeah.
But it is really interesting. So it must have been like so normalized to them that they wouldn't try to build around it. That's what's peculiar to me.
You know, it's a roof over people's heads in a lot of places, and these, particularly the temples, man. They don't care, and they'd cut holes in it, and they'd take, a lot of people would scoop out, they'd get a blade and scoop out material and take it as some sort of, you know, healing powder or whatever, or you're taking a piece from the gods and stuff like that. So